broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is Will's Front, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wills.
Hello everyone and welcome to the midweek edition of Wilmsfront on this Wednesday, the 21st of October 2020. We are live on the Wilmsfront YouTube and DLive channel, as well as on the Unshackled's Facebook page now. As always, the show is live on Entropy, the interactive live streaming enhanced software, which you can join through the live chats, where you can ask questions or send through super chats. It is 7 p.m. here in still lockdown Melbourne, but with daily new coronavirus cases in Victoria now in the low single digits, the reopening of metropolitan Melbourne and the full lifting of house arrest and travel restrictions is not far away, with the next step all but certain to be fast-tracked to be enacted this Monday. But the battle to hold those accountable in the Victorian government who caused the state's second wave has only just begun. Back at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, the majority of Australians put their trust and faith in governments at both state and federal level through the National Cabinet body to keep them safe from the virus. Not to my surprise, this blind faith in government was seriously misplaced, with various inquiries and commissions in Victoria, New South Wales and at the Commonwealth level currently investigating cover-ups, dodgy deals and stuff-ups. There is certainly a lot of mismanagement at the very least that is coming to light. On top of all of that, we have the Queensland state election in less than 2 weeks. Based on the campaign so far of the incumbent Palaszczuk Labor government and the LNP opposition leader Deb Frecklington, basically both don't deserve to win. My guest tonight is Kutasi. He is president of the HR Nicholls Society, which lobbies for more flexibility in Australia's labour market. He is a lawyer by trade, so is well versed in how these various inquiries and commissions operate, their powers and their effectiveness. I can think of no better person to provide some expertise on the past week in Australian politics than Kyle. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure being on your show, Tim.
You're a New South Welshman, so you're in the, I guess you could call it semi-free state. I'm down here in, well, as I just said, technically still locked down Melbourne. I did book managed to get in a hairdresser's appointment for next Wednesday. So by next Wednesday's Will's Front, I'll finally have this under control, because it's throughout the show it goes in my face, and yeah.
I heard someone say earlier today that Melbourne makes California look like Geneva by comparison. So describing New South Wales as a semi-free state by comparison to Victoria is it's a very, very faint praise, Tim.
I don't think Victoria is on the path to the US West Coast states. So we're there on the road to Hotel California, but not there yet. We all hope down here, the sane ones, that this is a wake-up call to Victorians.
Well, sadly, I don't think it is. I think if anything, the election results in the ACT and New Zealand on the weekend have shown that the majority of people still love lockdowns.
It can also be described as that during times of crisis and emergencies, whether it be war or a virus, people elect the incumbent governance. I mean, if you go back to the war on terror in the early 2000s and the Iraq War, Howard, Blair and Bush all won a second term. Both Bush and Howard had increased majority. So even though there's obviously a lot of vocal opposition at the ballot box, as we just saw on the weekend, the incumbents get rewarded.
Well, yeah, sure, to some degree. I mean, don't forget, Menzies lost in the middle of the Second World War, and Bush only barely scraped back in 2004 against a very weak opponent in John Kerry. But there may be some truth to what you say. I would say, pushing back against that too, is we're not even really in a crisis, though, are we? It's a self-made crisis.
Oh yes, in terms of the the cost has come from the recession, the huge budget deficit, and what is it now? Our national debt is expected to peak now at 1 trillion. That's not caused by the virus, the lockdown.
No, it's a ludicrous sum of money. I mean, how are we going to afford that? It's either going to be massive tax increases, or at some point in the future, someone has to absolutely cut the guts out of government expenditure in order to balance that. It doesn't go on forever. It doesn't grow on trees. Well, it can. You can inflate the hell out of the economy as a way of killing government debt. That's a way too. But either which way you go at it, the Australian public loses in the long term, not in the short term.
Yeah, money doesn't grow on trees. It gets printed in the mint, or in the digital age, just adding it on the computer. I know that Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, his term for it is that the Reserve Bank is injecting liquidity, which is a nice political term for him to use.
Mate, you got to wonder, why does anyone vote for Liberal governments? You have to wonder, you're just getting Labor, maybe a softer edge to the hard socialism that you'd otherwise get from a Labor government. It's not really much of a choice, is there?
Yeah, that's quite, I think, an accurate summary at the moment, especially based on the federal budget, where, well, it's not just what the deficits that were delivered, 83 billion this year and 215 billion for the next year, this financial year, but Josh Frydenberg basically saying we're going to abandon any fiscal responsibility at all. That's essentially what he said.
Yeah, and you know, do you think who's going to balance the budget? If it's not these guys, it's certainly not going to be Labor. When's it ever going to get balanced? They always promise. It never happens, ever. Because no one's prepared to make the hard decisions, Tim, as always. Who is going to be the person who stands up and says, you know what, the $10 billion we spend every year on X program, we're just going to stop that right now. No one, you can't do it. It's just too politically hard. And, you know, so Libs tinker around the edges. You know, we'll deduct 2% from the ABC. We'll take, you know, 3% out of this program. We won't fund universities to the same extent as we might have otherwise done. But you're just playing. It's not really hard decisions that are being made. It's never going to improve. You need a situation where Howard came in and say 96. If you recall, I don't know how old you are, Tim, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I remember when Howard got elected in 96 and Keating had left a $10 billion budget, black hole, 10, not a trillion, 10 billion. And they made an absolute song and dance about how it was just an enormous amount of money. And it is an enormous amount of money. And that they had to cut the guts out of everything. And I think within 12 months, Canberra had halved in size because they just blew up all these government departments and programs. And by the time they'd finished in office, over 10 years later, Canberra was bigger than it had been before Howard got into office. The tax take was bigger than it had ever been. The expenditure was bigger than it had ever been. And that was Howard who was running budget surpluses. You know, these guys haven't even tried to do anything close to that. And now partly, you know, I'll get started on my old topic of how much I dislike Tony Abbott and his government. Partly the rot set in there. He had an opportunity when he first got elected to go to town, and he chose not to because he's not really a conservative or a liberal. He's always been a socialist who doesn't know what he believes in, and so he squibbed on the opportunity. Turnbull was never going to do it, and you know, and now Morrison doesn't have the political capital to do it either.
Oh, this is why I got you on, Kyle, to rant and rave at how the Conservatives and centre-right have let us down so much.
Well, they're not conservatives. They're self-described conservatives, but yes.
Yes, they've adopted the label.
You can count the number of conservatives in the Australian Parliament on 3 fingers.
Well, if you look at over the past 30 years, the political leaders that have actually done things to rein in spending, government largesse, and deregulate the economy, they haven't lasted long politically. Jeff Kennedy in Victoria, he lasted 2 terms, had that obviously shock loss in 1999, which finished his political career. Campbell Newman in recent memory in Queensland lasted a term, lost a huge staggering majority that he won in 2012 and 2015. And if you go over to New Zealand, Ruth Richardson, the finance minister in the 1990s, she only lasted a term until she was shafted from the finance portfolio. So politicians these days, they want a long political career, and if doing what's good for the country only gets you 1 or 2 terms, that's not an appealing thing for a lot of political professionals.
Oh, Tim, don't misunderstand me. I'm well aware that true conservatism is in the absolute minority, not just in Australia, but all around the world, no matter where you go. I'm well aware of that, but that doesn't mean that you should give up on the idea, not continue to sell the concepts, or when you're in government, make the most of the limited time that you have. I as much as I dislike him and his politics, I actually admire the way that Gough Whitlam went about his time in office. He didn't care that he only got a short time in office. He was there to be as communist as he could possibly be. And the things that Whitlam did in 3 years, we are still living with today. He achieved much more in 3 years than I think you could say all the other prime ministers since have done collectively. So what does it matter that he was only in office for 3 years? Is not the point of being in office to achieve outcomes? That's my outcome. That's my take on it. And but yes, what you say is absolutely correct. The vast majority of politicians who go in, whether Liberal, Labor or otherwise, are there to have lengthy careers. Part of the reason is that they get paid way too much for what they're doing. And for many of them, the most they're ever going to get paid is their time in Parliament. And so it's a make work scheme, and you don't want to lose your make work scheme. And that's the situation that we have.
Well, it's obviously they get a good salary when they're in Parliament, but when they do retire, we're going to get to one of the retiring politicians who's re-emerged as a corporate executive, Helen Coonan. Later on, there's obviously a lot of opportunities for politicians post-politics to be on company boards, consultancy. Peter Costello is the chairman of Channel 9. So it's not just they get a good salary in the job, but there's tons of opportunities afterwards.
Well, that's right too. I'd also just hazard that I think it's overestimated perhaps the amount of opportunities that politicians get outside of Parliament, because the vast majority of the people who get elected to Parliament are actually losers. Like, seriously, they get elected to Parliament because they can't do anything else in life. Not all of them. There's some very good people there, don't get me wrong, but the vast majority of them are absolute losers. And their jobs before they were in Parliament were stacking shelves at Coles. Okay, now there's nothing wrong with stacking shelves at Coles. There's nothing wrong with that. Any work is good work. All for that. But almost everyone who's a Labor politician was a union official. That is a completely unproductive activity that has never achieved anything for anyone. And for many, many Liberal politicians as well, they come from either backgrounds as political staffers, lobbyists, consultants, whatever you want to put on. And most of that is also unproductive work. And that's why I said that the most they're ever going to get paid in their life is their time in Parliament. Now, in the case of Helen Coonan, I actually worked for Helen, full disclosure, a very long time ago, over 17 years ago. So I don't carry any water for her, and it was a very short period of time employed by her. She's a very smart woman, and she was married to a federal court judge, and no doubt she does have a lot of nous and legal connections and whatnot that maybe makes her attractive to certain people. But and there's others as well. But the vast majority of politicians, when they leave office, actually end up doing nothing. literally nothing at all, or they, run coffee shops, or they, fart ass around, get an occasional job on an ASX listed board because it gives credibility to the company. But beyond that, they don't really do anything. They don't amount to anything. It's a completely different topic as to why our political system is so broken and we do attract so many losers into office. We can have that conversation for another time if you want. But that's largely why we have the leadership that we have, because we got low quality people in office, Tim.
And that's why my state of Victoria is in such a mess at the moment, because people, there's been much more scrutiny on Dan Andrews than there's ever been before, even though he's been Premier for 6 years, leader of the Labor Party for 10 years. He's never had a real job in his life. He started off as a staffer, worked his way through the Labor Party machine on the socialist left faction, and that's what got him into the job. That's why he, even at this stage, he still doesn't get what small business are going through at the moment. And in terms of, I was talking about that the hairdressers are finally open, they were given 1 day's notice that they're allowed to reopen. I call it Dan D Day every Sunday. Nobody knows what the restrictions are going to be relaxed until he's announces it, and it makes for good, I would say, media theatre, because they live film the reaction of various business operators. So they filmed this hairdresser who was like, yes, and then his phone rang automatically. But the fact that you find out whether you're allowed to open the next day based on what this leader tells you has never run a business.
Oh, of course. It goes without saying. Are there many people in Parliament who ever have run any businesses? Certainly on the Labor side, almost none. Certainly on the Green side, zero. And on the Coalition side, there's a few. There's a couple here and there. By and large, mostly not. But that's why you get what we're getting. Most people just don't understand what it's like to be in small business in Australia. And
I would hope, I know you're much more cynical than I am, that the focus this year on the small business owners and those, also those who work in hospitality and events and that, who've had their lives turned upside down, there's a much more, I'm only speaking my own experience, I've certainly developed a lot more empathy for people in those industries, given what they're going to. Not that I didn't before, but I've been feeling a lot more people's pain, if you get what I mean. You seem like the cynical one, but I hope that, obviously it won't be through the political class, but just through the general public, a greater appreciation for the entrepreneur.
Oh, mate. Well, if only that were the case, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in at the moment, are we? I act in my professional life. I act for a very large number of small businesses. Now, in this lockdown climate, and I know New South Wales is not technically in lockdown, but we still have a lot of restrictions here. There's a lot of difficulty for a lot of small businesses. Now, some are doing very well. I have some clients in aged care who have done extremely well at the moment out of the situation, because they're getting subsidies to continue to provide what they're doing. There are some businesses that have really taken off. Retail in shopping centres, for example, have done okay where the shopping centre is allowed to be open. But the person who's running a cafe out on Main Street, they've been smashed. They've been smashed really hard. And it flows on through the line, because the people who've been smashed are able to get the JobKeeper or the Job Seeker relief, which enables them to be able to go to their landlords and say, well, we don't have to pay your bills. And so there are people who, and many of them are retirees, not people who are super wealthy. They just managed to save up enough money over their careers to buy a commercial property, and they rely on that rent for their retirement income. And at the moment, they got tenants who are saying, well, we don't have to pay you and you can't make it. And I understand why the if you want to call it the relief was brought in, but all you're doing is delaying the problem. You're just delaying it for 6 months or 12 months or whatever the case may be. Which, by the way, is the same problem with the lockdowns themselves, full stop. All you're doing is delaying people catching the virus. You're not actually solving the problem.
I was sort of hoping for a while with the second wave that it became so widespread here in Victoria that due to our state government's incompetence, Victoria could reach herd immunity, but I don't think 20,000 infections in a population of 6.8 million is herd immunity, but the state of Victoria has certainly been more exposed to the virus. But you're right in the sense the state of WA, which is it's de facto seceded from Australia. They haven't had a community transmission for how many months now? How long are they going to stay cut off for? Are they pinning their hopes on this vaccine? Although McGowan and his chief medical officer have let the cat out of the bag and said, no, this is not based on health advice, this hard border. We want to keep WA money in WA.
So first thing, I just want to take on something you said. You called a second wave in Victoria, and I know that's the general colloquial term for it. We haven't had a first wave yet in Australia.
You've got a good point there, right? The first wave we had, I've referred to it myself as a phony wave. Like what we had in Victoria was a legit first wave.
And you're right, there is no science to any of this. And it's a point that a few people have been making for a long time now in relation to this is if it was about stopping community transmission, then why would you allow anyone out of their home under any circumstances, right? If you really want to zap it, wouldn't you just do that for 2 weeks? Wouldn't you just say, all right, everyone, you step outside of your house, we're going to arrest you. 2 weeks, the whole thing's gone, isn't it? If that's what you really want to do. But instead, we've got a situation where you can go to a supermarket, even under the lockdown requirements, you're allowed to go to a supermarket, you can sneeze and cough all over the apples and oranges as much as you want, but you're not allowed to go to a coffee shop. I've got a client who's a truck driver in Western Australia. She, believe it or not, she has a permit where she can drive in and out of Western Australia unrestricted. So what if she picks it up in Adelaide on the way back? She doesn't know she's incubating it. She gets in WA, she spreads it to 100 people. Bingo, you've got community transmission all over again. So it can't be about, oh, well, we really desperately need to stop this from transmitting, because if that was the case, you would do much more draconian measures than you're doing. It would appear, based on the rules that we're seeing, is that it's actually about slowing it down. That seems to be what all the restrictions are about, slowing it down. So why would we slow it down? If you're going to get it, whether it takes tomorrow or next year or next week or 10 years' time, if you're going to get it, you're going to get it. Okay? So then the question is, well, when it was first started back in March, it was argued that, well, we need to flatten the curve because we have to make sure that the hospitals have the ability to deal with it. Okay, I understand that argument. Okay, I never agreed with it, but let's just run with that argument for a minute. Well, the curve was flattened. So if all we're doing is slowing it, what purpose are we using to slow it? What are we achieving by that? I still don't understand. Can you tell me, Tim, what purpose are we achieving by slowing it?
Well, you're right that flattening the curve, that was the deal, because we still didn't know in March all that we know now about the virus, because it came from communist China and they were telling so many lies about it. And so was World Health Organization providing really conflicting information. But we know much more 6 months later. But we've seen this mission creep from flatten the curve to elimination, that if one person dies, it's too many now. And we just have, Dan Andrews has said it himself. He's only focused singularly on defeating this virus. He doesn't care at all what the other consequences are of these lockdowns.
Except that Dan has said it's impossible to eliminate. So if it's impossible to eliminate, then why are we doing anything at all? And if it is about elimination, then why would you allow the restrictions to ease off? It doesn't make any sense. If you're going to eliminate it, wouldn't you do everything you can to eliminate it? That would mean completely closed borders. That would mean completely closed homes. You'd mean no one's allowed to leave their home under any circumstances, wouldn't it? Wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you just go the hardest, sharpest, shortest pain that you could possibly do, but be severe in it? You don't cut half of a cancer out and hope it doesn't grow back. Don't you cut the whole thing out? But they've never done that because you can't. And New Zealand's shown that. Remember when New Zealand suddenly, after having eliminated the virus, it suddenly got it again and no one knows where it came from.
Apparently it came from some frozen chicken. That was a theory that was going around.
Tim, if frozen chicken is enough to spread it, what hope do you think you've got of ever stopping this? It's just going to keep coming back. So what do? Do we keep the borders closed forever? Do we keep everyone down under lockdown forever? At what point do we say, okay, there's no more restrictions? At what point? So, but let's go back a step too. Let's just go back to March, because as you well know, I was against any measures, even all the way back in March. And the reason why is, let's even assume for a minute that this virus kills 50% of people who get it. Let's just assume that for a second, right? Again, what can you do about that? How does a lockdown prevent that? All it does is slow it down. Unless you're going to keep a border closed forever, how do you prevent that? Because it's endemic. By the time we were locking down, you had half of Italy infected. So what made you think, I'm not saying you personally, Tim, because I know you've got a different view on this, but what made anyone, the royal you, what made anyone think that any measures were going to be able to effectively deal with this? The argument always was at the very start was, we need to help the health system deal with this. Okay, understood. That's it. That problem passed a long time ago, right? They built all the tents in New York, in Central Park, that never got used. So that was a long time ago. Why are we still going through this?
And they never ran out of ventilators in New York, like Andrew Cuomo claimed. I just want to show people for a moment your Facebook profile picture at the moment, which I think sums up your, that's of course Chuck Norris. People know all about the Chuck Norris tough guy memes, and he's drinking basically a bottle of coronavirus.
Yeah, he's enjoying it. He's really enjoying imbibing it. But let's face it too. I believe it or not, by the way, I actually had a client who died of coronavirus. Have a guess how old they were?
Old?
93.
Yeah, that's old.
His 95-year-old wife survived it.
Mm.
And I've known probably 20 or 30 other people who've had it since. And mostly it was nothing more than a sniffle. Yeah, there was one guy ended up on a ventilator, again, an elderly man. It's not killing everyone. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, we should not care about it killing people. But there's things you can do about people aged over 70, right? It would have been cheaper for the government at the very start to have gone, all right, we're going to set up isolation zones for anyone who wants to go in there. And if you want to live there for as long as you want in a bubble, we'll do that. And we'll protect you inside this bubble. If that's what you want to do, we'll do that. And let everyone else in the world get on with whatever they want to get on with. Right? And that would have been a significantly cheaper option than what we've ended up doing. So why are we doing this?
Well, it seems politics, and also this is basically the I would say the height of the, I'm not sure what the official terminology is, but the public health zealots, that you've got to have these preventative big government measures. Obviously, Australia has been a world leader when it comes to excessive tobacco excise. They just went up again. It basically, cigarettes now, it's $2 for every stick now, basically. And then, of course, the plain packaging with the full-on graphic. Despite our reputation as heavy drinkers, our alcohol is excessively taxed, and there's always this public health expert interviewed on, was it ABC Health or something, every few months, or that we need to have a sugar tax or fat tax or this sort of thing. The nanny state has seen its biggest growth in Australia over recent years.
Yeah, and this is a rhetorical question, Tim, where does government derive its understanding of what is right and wrong from?
It's well, in recent years, it's just relied on advice from bureaucrats and the people in the universities.
But what's the standard by which it judges what's right and wrong? It seems to be made up on the run, or it's whatever prevailing understanding or views are at any given time. And
the media are as well. What the Canberra press bubble is talking about, and we'll talk about the influence of media when we talk about the Gladys's troubles.
The ultimate press bubble as well, and and this is a problem. And I don't want to sidetrack too much, but I think what we're seeing is when you have elevated science to a godlike status, when science comes out and makes a pronouncement, how is God fallible? He's not. So you can't therefore accept when science is wrong, and you can't logically challenge it because, well, science has said so. And this is where the vast majority of people are, which is why the vast majority of people still believe that Dan Andrews is doing a great job. The vast majority of people still believe that lockdowns are the right thing to do. Now, part of that as well is that because those who have lost their jobs are getting paid by the government. I understand that's taken a lot of the heat away. If you didn't have JobKeeper and JobSeeker, I think we'd be in a different situation right now. But nonetheless, whilst everyone's living on the government teat, they're happy to go along with this for the time being, and they still believe that the science says that what they did was right.
Yeah, this is what's been so frustrating to me. I know a lot of the I Stand With Dan people on Twitter have been revealed as bots, but there's genuine people who say, yeah, we just need to keep locked down for a bit longer. And Dan Andrews' line has been, oh, we need to stay closed so we can stay open properly. So stay closed for more so you can stay open permanently.
This is the idea he spread, that the only reason Victoria is having the problems that it's having is because you wouldn't follow my rules in the first place. And if all you've done is to do what I told you to do and properly social distance and stay away from each other instead of, by the way, I don't believe the story that security guards spread it by having sex with people in lockdown, by the way. That just seems ridiculously far-fetched. But he's pointing the finger at everyone else and saying it's all your fault.
Well, if big government had a face, it would be Dan Andrews' face.
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, back to our original point too. What's your alternative in Victoria? Ted Baillieu? Come on. Would he have done any differently here? Nah.
You even got the name wrong. Michael O'Brien's the opposition leader.
No. But Ted was the premier before Dan.
Well, he resigned mid-term, and we had Dennis Napthine.
Well, okay.
Campaign
Would Dennis Napthine have done anything differently?
I don't think he'd been as bad as Dan, just like Gladys hasn't been as bad as Dan. Stephen Marshall hasn't been as bad as Dan, but they've still been pretty bad, especially when it comes to singing and dancing, and you can't stand up at the pub.
Tim, New South Wales had, as I understand it, I'm not a member of cabinet, and I have not received any information from anyone in cabinet, but there was a story that went around, obviously leaked by someone about 2 months ago, which said that New South Wales cabinet had a conversation about what would happen if New South Wales had the same re-explosion of numbers that Victoria had, and basically they concluded they would do exactly the same thing. Gladys is no different to Dan. It's just that he was in the situation to act. She hasn't been put in that situation yet. Now, maybe with hindsight, having seen what she's seen, that if it does explode again in New South Wales, as it will at some point, it is going to explode in New South Wales, as it is going to do everywhere else in the world. As soon as the restrictions are removed, what is she going to do about it? And I think that's still an open question. Not convinced that she will behave any differently to Daniel Andrews. Now, some people say that's a good thing.
Well, we saw when the Victoria's I shouldn't use the word second wave, but when it began to the Melbourne wave began to travel north, there was obviously you would say a trickle of cases in New South Wales, and I know that the media in Melbourne was egging Dan on to go to stage 3, masks, go to stage 4, and I know that they desperately wanted. Obviously to help feed their news cycle, cases to things to get out of hand in New South Wales, so they could lobby her to go into lockdown, which she didn't. New South Wales, they go through various stages where there might be 5 cases, 20 cases, then they eventually get it under control again. And Gladys she's slightly eased restrictions. So you can have private gatherings of 30 now. Religious gatherings have increased to 300, which I know you'll be pleased about as a man of faith. Though, in Victoria, you can only have outdoor gatherings at the moment, religious gatherings of 20.
I'm partly pleased, but not entirely pleased. The restrictions have been there for way too long for no good reason. Gladys reopened brothels before she allowed anyone to go to church. So tell me about how singing in church is going to spread the disease, but breathing all over someone in a brothel is not going to, apparently, according to the New South Wales government. That doesn't make any sense. The restrictions have still been there for far too long. What difference does it make whether you've got 100 people in a church or 300 people in a church? There is no logical reason for why. No one has caught it in a church yet, as far as I'm aware. I've not seen any evidence of anyone getting the disease. As I understand it too, there was a complaint about a month ago, I think, the Archbishop had quietly written. And by the way, if you want to get on the topic of weakness in this COVID period, all the ecclesiastical leaders in Australia have been pathetically weak. Whether Catholic, Anglican, Zoroastrian, I don't care. They have been pathetically weak. They were compromised because they didn't stand up to the government at the very start and say, we will not shut down because you've told us to. There is no good reason to shut down. We're commanded by God to worship you on Sundays particularly, but at any other time, and we're going to continue to do that. If someone doesn't want to join us because they're scared of getting ill, fine. That's fine. That's entirely someone's choice. But you're not going to tell us to shut down because of some what is effectively no worse than a sniffle. And they were compromised a long time ago and didn't say anything about it. And now they're quietly writing letters saying, why can we not have more than 100 people in a church? And so what Brad Hazard did here in New South Wales? He wrote back and he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll allow 300 at St Mary's Cathedral for Christmas Day. Oh, wow. That ought to solve every problem. And all they did was write letters back. It should have been on the front foot from the outset going, screw you, we're going to open and throw us in jail. Just do it. Come and round up all of us priests and ministers and throw us in jail. But they won't do that. One of my favourite theologians / pastors in the world is a man named John MacArthur in California. He reopened his church in the face of Gavin Newsom, the governor in California, nearly 2 months ago now. They've threatened to arrest him repeatedly, and he continues to say, come and get me, come and take me. And they won't do it because they know what it will look like to throw a man of a cloth in jail because he's conducting worship services on Sunday. Someone's just got to grow a pair of balls and get on with it and start saying to the government, we're going to do things our way, we're not going to do things your way.
The restrictions on religious gatherings came up in Dan's press conference today, and his justification was, this is a quote, churches, mosques and synagogues, they're not licensed premises, not a regulated environment. I think there is some concern. Mr. Andrews noted there would also be an issue with enforcing social distancing and other rules, pointing out that if a police officer walked through a place of worship to enforce the rules, it could cause offence. So I guess just best to shut all the places of worship down in that instance, and if anyone goes in them, like the Serbian Orthodox Church, then go in and fine them.
But the temples of Satan have been open the whole time. They didn't shut down abortion clinics, did they? At any stage?
No, essential service, apparently.
Yeah, hugely essential. Look, none of this surprises me though, Tim. No, I don't know what surprises anyone else. This is exactly what I expect from godless governments, Labor and Liberal. They act in exactly the same way. You just get a slight difference is that the Liberal Party doesn't like trade unions. What's the difference otherwise? There isn't.
Oh, Dan Andrews is an alleged Catholic, and his deputy James Molino is also an alleged Catholic as well.
So was Joe. So was John Kerry. So was John Kennedy. And Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy killed the woman he just had sex with, left her to drown in a river in Chappaquiddick. But he went and took communion the next day. Everything's forgiven.
Joe Biden's a Catholic as well.
Yeah. That's right. Is Kamala Harris claimed to be as well? I wouldn't know. Who knows? Who knows?
Oh, I think they all. Remember, Obama claimed that he was a Christian. Obviously, there was a lot of speculation at the time he was a Muslim, but I agree with Ann Coulter that he's most likely an atheist.
Obama went to a black liberation church. I don't know how you could understand that in any historical context to be a Christian faith, but even if you allow that he once attended it. Is there anything in his worldview, Obama's worldview, that ever demonstrated that he had any Christian beliefs? None. You're not a Christian just because you put your hand up and say, "Hey, I'm a Christian." Right?
Oh, he said, "God bless the United States of America."
Well, Trump says that too. Trump's not a Christian.
Yeah, it's it's basically you just have to say it to basically placate people. Well, Australia, we broke the glass ceiling with our atheist Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. So,
well, actually, Bob Hawke was the first to be openly atheist.
Was he? He was an atheist?
Absolutely, 100% open atheist. He was actually, I don't know if you know the story of Bob Hawke. He was actually raised, his father was a Methodist minister. And Bob went in, when he was 18, I think, to a missionary conference in India, and he abandoned his faith when he saw people lying in gutters dead in India, and he went, "There's so much misery. How could there be a God?" And from that day forward, he was very openly atheist. But nonetheless, I take your point.
Yeah, well, now that you've mentioned Bob Hawke, he didn't exactly live you would say a Christian moral lifestyle.
No, but of course not. But I mean, the lifestyle that a person lives is merely indicative of the faith they try to live out. There are many of us fallen, myself included, who maybe don't live the best life that they should. But it's about understanding that and repenting of it, I suppose. But let's not get into a theological discussion right now, Tim. But yeah.
Yep, I'll keep going with what Dan said. He said, it's not like a pub where there is a red line and a green line, and there is a license, and there is a responsible service of alcohol and other things. You don't need a liquor license to give Holy Communion.
No, you don't actually. You don't. As far as I'm aware. I mean, I'm not Catholic, but it's my opinion.
Dan might be proposing a new regulation with that one. Who knows?
But I don't understand. It's such a weak argument to say, well, we can control what goes on in pubs because they're licensed. What? So then if you can't control what goes in coffee shops, then why are you putting any restrictions on them whatsoever? Police can walk into a coffee shop right now and say, "You've got too many people in here. Here's a fine for you." Look, they're coming out with excuses to justify what they know is wrong. The problem for Daniel Andrews, the problem for Stephen Marshall, the problem for, I forget what the Premier of Western Australia's name, the problem for Palaszczuk, the problem for all of them is that they got it wrong in March and they can't admit that they got it wrong. It's the same problem for Boris Johnson. It's the same problem for everyone in the world now, with the exception of the Swedish Prime Minister. They all got it wrong, and they can't accept that they completely burned their economies because they got it wrong. So they have to keep doubling down. And right now, it still remains popular because you've got too many people who believe they're about to die.
Well, one of the few exceptions to that, I would say, is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who did do the shutdowns in March, but has recently basically said enough of this. I'm lifting all restrictions. I'm banning local governments from mandating masks. It has a 99% recovery rate. We're staying open, hook or by crook. Our hospital system can handle it.
So DeSantis admitted he got it wrong, which is good. But he still got it wrong.
Yes, but he's one of the few politicians who has done the mea culpa and said, "Look, that was wrong." It is very rare for politicians to basically, after they've pursued a strategy or policy for so long, to admit, yeah, this was wrong. We're going to flip it, reassess, get rid of it.
Agreed. It's a self-preservation activity. The minute any of these politicians that we have accepted they got it wrong, they're going to get the next cut. Not in a literal sense, in a political sense. And as you pointed out at the very start of this conversation, Tim, they're there to protect their necks. Protect their necks
from the public or the media?
Well, the media sways a lot of how the public view them. And I know you might get onto this topic later, but a classic example is what's happened in the last week with Gladys Berejiklian and ICAC. That is a classic. Media has swayed the entire discussion there of what took place, and the vast majority of people don't know what actually took place because of the way it's been portrayed in the media.
Yeah, it's been quite a contrast where you see, I think the most dogged journalist in pursuing Gladys has been Andrew Clennell of Sky News, been very aggressive in her press conferences, but the public perception is backed up by the polling and what she says that she's has been received in her office, that people sympathize. I don't think that, not feeling sorry, I don't think is the right term, but they sympathize with her. Oh yeah, we've all had bad relationships. She seems like a nice lady. And she did that, Sunday Telegraph splash where she was like, oh, I was so in love with him and I've given up on love. And I think, I'm not sure about you're the New South Welshman in the thick of this, but it looks like from the outside, she will survive. And as a Victorian, I'm like, hey, Gladys didn't put me under house arrest 23 hours a day. Shut down the entire economy, lead to all these deaths. So, she shouldn't resign before somebody like Dan Andrews.
Well, I don't think that she will be pushed out either. But let me just pose a question to you. Okay, what evidence is there that she ever had a relationship with Daryl McGuire?
There's those phone taps and basically both of what they said.
But okay, what did they say? They said that they had a close personal relationship. I have a close personal relationship with my mother. It doesn't mean I'm having sex with my mother. I have a close personal relationship with many of my male friends. It doesn't mean I'm having sex with them. She has never ever once claimed that she had a relationship with him other than as colleagues in Parliament. Admittedly, Yesterday, she did an interview with Ben Fordham on 2GB here in Sydney, where she said he was never my boyfriend. So how do you reconcile the implication that she had a relationship with him with her statement that she was never his boyfriend or he was never her boyfriend? None of it makes any sense. There was a deliberate attempt by her to set the media talk about her so-called relationship with McGuire as a way of diverting the attention away from what ended up coming out at ICAC, and that 99% of people have not heard, which was the tapes. And I don't know if you've heard the tapes, but if you've got in the tapes, you've got a situation where McGuire was calling her late at night. As, by the way, I'm not suggesting that means anything either, by the way. She's a premier. I'm sure that she got a lot of phone calls from her party members late at night. He sounds like a sort of if you listen to her on the tapes, she sounds like something of an agony aunt. You know, like, oh yeah, this guy likes to call me up and complain about all these problems in life, and she just sat there humouring him. She just sat there, you know, yes, that's interesting. Yeah,
exactly.
Good for you. Oh wow, that's wonderful, mate. Yep, great, really great to hear that sort of stuff. And on those tapes, you hear him call her, and he says, after I got divorced, I'm $1.5 million in debt. And by the way, if this Badgerys Creek development gets approved, I get a $500,000 clip from the Chinese developer. That's going to help a lot with my debt. And what does she say? She goes, oh, that's interesting. And then she goes and approves Badgerys Creek. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not for 1 second suggesting that Gladys would have otherwise not approved Badgerys Creek. I'm 100% certain that it would have been approved. I don't think she, and I don't know her super well, but I do know Gladys to a small degree. And she's not the sort of person that I would think would be corrupt. And I'm not for 1 second suggesting that she is, right? But it's extraordinarily bad leadership to sit there whilst one of your MPs and your whip at one stage, I don't know what stage she was or wasn't her whip, but at one stage he was her whip, and is telling her that he's getting paid whilst he's an MP to be lobbied by the Chinese, and he's going to get a clip from her approving the development. And she doesn't say to him, stop, don't talk to me about this stuff. You shouldn't be bringing this stuff up with me, and you shouldn't be taking a clip from the Chinese whilst you're a member of parliament. She just goes, oh, that's nice. Thank you. Yeah, good luck, mate. It's not corrupt. It's not illegal, but it's extremely bad leadership. And 99% of the public doesn't know that, because she allowed the story to be spread that it was all about a relationship with her and Daryl, which is a non-existent relationship.
Obviously, when she said it was a close personal relationship, that's they put it in G-rated terms at ICAC. But the reason why this has become such a sensational story is because it seems so out of character for the Gladys that a lot of people know, and that the public have the perception of. And also the reason it's got legs is because the story combines two sensationalist elements, sex and politics, and when they go together, that makes for an incredibly juicy and sensationalist news cycle. I just want to, for a moment, just show what one of your most premier satire websites in Sydney, Double Bay Today, has been writing about Gladys. Network 10 announces Gladys is the new bachelorette. Gladys Berejiklian's ex-boyfriend reportedly dating Annastacia Palaszczuk. Nation relieved to hear Gladys Berejiklian is getting some action. New South Wales voters call for less details about Gladys Berejiklian's love life.
But you see, that's diverted the attention. Imagine if the lead story that day was Premier listens to MP tell her he's lobbying for the Chinese. I think you get a completely different reaction to what ended up happening. Everyone thinks it's a story about Premier had a relationship with a guy who was dodgy. It's a totally different take. Now, Tim, you have to understand something, and I don't say this in any patronising way. The way that ICAC works, and I'm not a fan of ICAC, the way it works is that it's not criminal proceedings, right? It's a deliberate body that exists for the purpose of exposing corruption. And so they take the view that because they don't exist to criminally prosecute anyone, they therefore have a liberty to do whatever they want and expose whatever they want, as long as you're a public official. That's the view that they take. So that's why they wiretap the Premier. That's why they go rummaging through people's rubbish bins. That's why that they will put out any allegation about you at ICAC that they feel is relevant, because at the end of the day, what does it matter? It doesn't count against you in any criminal proceedings. Now, of course, that destroys people's dignity when there's allegations about them out there, and all you have to do is have a read on the internet for 5 seconds about what they did to Margaret Caneen, who was the.
Yes, I'm familiar with that story. Yes.
Right. Let's not get into that right now. But that's what happens when you give an inquisitorial body the power to do whatever the hell it wants, right? So their view on all this stuff, and they get lots of tip-offs all day. They run multiple investigations on a daily basis. you never hear anything about. Often they involve low-level council officials, and that no one cares about that, right? Because the saying goes, the eagle doesn't catch flies. So what they're there to do is they're there to tell the public we're here to catch corrupt politicians, and we're here to expose that. And so what that means is that when it comes to a guy like Daryl McGuire, and he is a big name because he was an MP, he was a whip, etc. And I'm not saying he's done anything wrong. I don't know enough about him, but it does. There's some terrible allegations against him. Again, nothing illegal. It's not illegal to work whilst you're a member of parliament, but really, should you be a lobbyist for the Chinese whilst you're in parliament? I think probably not. But leave that aside for a minute. The way that it works is that they want to know that they've got enough evidence to run an investigation before they actually run it. So what they do is they conduct private hearings, and they're all completely silent, and they can't be published, and you're not even allowed to talk about them except with your lawyers. And ICAC as well is not allowed to publish a transcript of those private hearings. It's like a secret investigation process, a bit like a grand jury is in the United States, if you're familiar with what happens there. And then following that process, if they feel they've got enough, then they conduct a public hearing, but they ask you all the same questions again that they asked you in the private hearing. So what that means is that Gladys was in a private hearing on this matter 2 to 3 months ago. She knew exactly what questions were going to be asked of her. She knew exactly what questions were coming to her, and she knew the evidence she'd already given in relation to it. So this didn't come as a surprise to her. And she had 3 months to think about, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? How am I going to deal with the fact that I sat there on conversations with this guy? He told me about how he's getting money from the Chinese, and I didn't do anything about it. What do I do? Now, this is only conspiratorial on my part, but I think she allowed the close personal relationship to be the diversion as a consequence.
ICAC, it's we've seen the public hearings through the past week. They've been shown on Sky and their extra channels, but it's basically, since it can only basically find people corrupt, and it's up to the DPP to pursue charges. It's basically, at the end of the day, show trial political theatre, which a lot of these royal commissions and inquiries are.
Well, and hey, by the way, ICAC's been there since 1988 when Nick Greiner created it, right? And then Bob Carr gets in 95, Labor. And what does ICAC do for 16 years? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And by the way, there's a very strong argument. You could argue that the Carr government, not Bob Carr himself necessarily, but members of his government are the most corrupt politicians that have ever existed in Australian political history. I mean, Eddie Obeid effectively became a multi-millionaire off the back of his time in Parliament, and he wasn't the only one. And what did ICAC do during all those years? Absolutely nothing. It only started dealing with Obeid after he was out of office. That's how much ICAC dealt with it. Why? Now, part of the reason is that Carr very cleverly took away a lot of the powers of ICAC during the time that he was in government. And of course, a compliant media doesn't say anything about that. And then, but also stupidly, O'Farrell gets in and then immediately restores those powers, and they use them to go after him because the media and the elite lawyers generally they're generally socialists. And so, they're very happy to go after a government. But by the way, not that Barry O'Farrell wasn't a socialist too, but leave that aside. We won't get into that right now. So they're very happy to bring down Liberal governments because they're not Labor.
They brought down Greiner and O'Farrell.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't understand with O'Farrell resigning over a bottle of wine. You got to wonder what that's about.
It was basically a gotcha that he couldn't remember receiving this bottle of wine, and then the next day the smoking bottle comes out, and it's got a thank you note where he writes, thank you for giving me this, thank you for all, it's underlined your support. And so that But
do you think he wouldn't have survived that politically? Of course he would have survived it politically. You got to wonder sometimes. I don't know if you remember back in, I think it was 2004, John Brogden, when he was the state leader, resigned because he told a dirty joke at a party when he was drunk. And I thought, really, you wouldn't have politically survived that? I mean, seriously, you got to wonder sometimes. I think sometimes these guys just get jack of it and they just go, you know what, stuff it. I'm going to throw the towel in.
There's a meme going around on Facebook. I'll put it in more polite terms, but it has Gladys Berejiklian screws one person may need to resign. Daniel Andrews screws 6.8 million Victorians. Job safe.
Yeah. Well, I understand the sentiment. Yeah.
Obviously, it seems like Gladys is going to survive because all of her senior ministers have come out very strongly, backing her, rallying around her. So as Scott Morrison, even John Barilaro has come back from mental health leave, even though they had that blow up over the koala policy, which Gladys has backed down on. It's quite funny how he can come back and sort of say, yeah, we get on well. And also I thought it quite interesting. Andrew Constant said that Gladys is my friend. He also said Barilaro was his friend. Well, we saw the text messages between Constance and Barilaro. There sort of seems to be this sort of very it's probably the most, you would say, because we know that the Labor cabinets, they all rally around, protect one another. I would say that the New South Wales coalition government is probably the only one on the sort of centre right that does that. We saw Don Harwin, he stood aside when he got that fine, then he got out of it, and it's like, yeah, you're back in. You got kicked out of the Legislative Council yesterday.
He was very badly treated, Don. You know, again, I don't carry any water for him, but he did nothing wrong there. He was publicly embarrassed over something that he clearly did nothing wrong, and you know that was another media beat up. But anyway, leave that aside for the time being. Are you familiar with the Manuel Noriega quote? There's no friends in politics. There's just people who have common interests at a particular point in time.
Yeah, that sums up what I was saying about New South Wales coalition government.
Well, I mean, look, you've got a problem where I think you could argue that the National Party in New South Wales is far more left-wing than the Liberal Party, and that's saying something. There is virtually no one left in the New South Wales Nationals who is a traditional regional country.
Barilaro is, I would term him as a poor imitation Barnaby Joyce. He tries to behave like a maverick, but he's not.
And by the way, Barnaby Joyce is no Conservative, never has been. You know, people very, very quickly forget that Barnaby Joyce was the guy when he first got elected to the Senate in 2006 who voted against all the coalition's controversial policy stuff.
Yes, I remember.
Right,
including well, he is sort of dilly-dallied over IR work choices.
He did indeed. Now, by the way, we can also talk about how bad work choices was for a different reason, not because of the usual reason that the left was complaining about. I would complain that it actually was far too left-wing in that it re-regulated IR. It created a lot of Trojan horses that when Gillard got into office, she ran straight through. But even leave that aside for the time being. Joyce's complaints about work choices weren't the Conservative complaints about work choices. He was adopting many of the Socialist complaints about work choices. I remember he also, and this is something that's completely unforgivable, he voted against voluntary student unionism. He wanted,
yes, I remember.
He wanted people to be forced to join student unions, right? I don't believe it. I think, like Tony Abbott, Barnaby Joyce doesn't believe in anything, and he jumps on board what he thinks is a populist cause at any particular point in time.
I should be careful not to provide too many detours, because then that gets you on to another rant. I know why you accepted my invitation tonight, because you've got so much that you want to get off your chest and into the air.
Sorry for sidetracking you, Tim.
No, it's good. It's why you were requested to come on.
Oh well, I'm always happy to oblige.
So going back to where we were, the left-wing National Party in New South Wales.
Yeah, I mean, look, I won't go through particular individual names, but I'll take an example on the abortion vote here in New South Wales last year. I think there was maybe 3 nationals in both the lower and upper house who voted against it. That's an extraordinarily low number. For a supposedly traditionally conservative party, they've just completely sold out. Most of their MPs are really metro type, who still appeal to regional types because they aren't completely high taxing pro-union types. But other than that, they really don't hold a conservative bone in their body. They're more, I would almost argue, left libertarian in a way, but not true libertarian. A true libertarian would be, let's have less government regulation.
No, they're definitely not that.
No. It's hard to think of maybe the Conservatives in the UK under Boris Johnson. It's something similar. They're sort of right of the Labor Party, but they're not a Conservative party.
Let's go north now to Queensland, where Annastacia Palaszczuk, she's been under quite a number of months worth of scrutiny over the cruel border closure decisions that her bureaucrats and Chief Health Officer Dr. Jeanette Young have made, particularly to very sick people getting treatment in New South Wales and having to hotel quarantine. And also that tragic mother who lost an unborn child. It just also broke today that there were 4 South Australian infants who died because they couldn't get across to Victoria for urgent treatment. We do not know if that's the Victorian government that made that decision or the South Australian government. But obviously, there's been. I'll provide another meme to you. There's a meme with Daniel Andrews saying, "I'm the worst premier in history," and Annastacia Palaszczuk saying, "Hold my beer." But Deb Frecklington, the LNP opposition leader, she and the whole of her party, they seem to be on the path to losing the unlosable election. They've began the process of losing it a while back. There was George Brandis many years ago, former LNP Queensland senator, was caught in a hot mic with former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger calling the Queensland LNP very mediocre. I think that was about 5 years ago. I don't think much changed, it looks.
Do you think that the LNP in Queensland is any different to the Liberal Party or national parties in any other state? I don't see how they differ in any way other than the fact they're not in office. And they are in office in South Australia and New South Wales. It's the same type of people, time after time after time, who get pre-selected. We started off this conversation talking about that. And so when you've got to choose a leader amongst those people, who are you going to choose? You're going to choose the best of what you've got. And maybe Deb Frecklington's the best that they've got. I don't know too many people in the Queensland Parliament, Liberal or Labor. Personally, I mean, I know of them, but I don't personally know them. But I know lots of people in New South Wales Parliament, and I know that most of them you wouldn't piss on if they're on fire. So why would it be any different if it was in Queensland?
There's also the added curveball is that they're still traumatized from Campbell Newman's loss in 2015. And Campbell Newman himself said that the LNP need to stop treating me like Voldemort. And, well, it wouldn't take much CGI to make Campbell Newman into like a Voldemort person, but that's half their problem. Don't forget the 3 years that we were in government over the past, 20 years. So just... And that's an incredibly hard sell. And there's still an incredible machine up there, Labor, in Queensland.
You've got to understand this, Tim, and this is the whole problem for if you want to call it right of centre parties at state government level, pretty much everywhere in the country. State governments pretty much no longer tax. I mean, there's a little bit, there's, stamp duty. But other than that, by and large, all the taxation is done at federal level. State governments pretty much just spend your money. And so who is best at spending your money? No one throws out money like Labor and the Greens do. And so for all state elections, the Libs have to give a cogent explanation as to why they should be elected instead of the party that spends more of the money that you've got to spend. The coalition has that's all they're fighting over, is who can build the most trains, who can build the most roads, who can throw up the most number of hospitals. That's all they're fighting over. And Labor's much, much better at running that argument. At least at federal level, you've got arguments about border security, which is a popular cause, which Labor does badly on. And you have something of an argument about fiscal management, which, again, they're throwing it away, but the Libs used to have something of an advantage in respect of, and that was what kept the Liberal government, or the Liberal Party, in a competitive state at the federal level. But at state level, all you're doing is you're getting the bounce back every decade or two when Labor is so on the nose, they've run out of steam. They'll give you a term as a Liberal, and they'll say, righto, you clean up the mess, and in the minute the mess is cleaned up, they throw you back out because they want Labor to come back and start splashing cash on public schools and hospitals all over again.
This is why it feels like in Victoria, 2020 is a rerun of 1990 Victoria, when the Kane-Kerner Labor government virtually sent the state broke, and then Jeff Kennedy, it was his third tilt at the premiership, won in a landslide. It feels like history is repeating itself. It's like that every 30 years, the Labor monster shows itself, if I use a movie parallel, because the reason why Dan won in 2018 was because of his infrastructure. He certainly wasn't getting value for money for the infrastructure. There's actually our state-based anti-corruption body, ICAC. They're actually conducting public hearings next week into some of the contracts with the public transport system, getting rid of the level crossings, the cross city tunnel and the suburban rail loop. They're Dan's signature policies, and that's why a lot of people voted for him. They didn't realize when they voted for him in 2018 they were going to be under house arrest in 2020. But it's been these projects have been delivered with incredibly poor value for money.
Well, what would you expect? I mean, most Labor people have never run a business in their life, as we all know. Most of the government bureaucrats have also never run businesses in their life, and they're there to reward their mates more often than not. They'll make sure that some pro-union firm gets the contract over the best price, and the pro-union firm's going to have kickbacks to all the union mates in the Victorian Trades Council, or whatever they call themselves, and it's, at the end of the day, it's taxpayers who pay for it. Who cares?
And obviously, through the industry restrictions of stage 4, construction hasn't been scaled back much. And even though John Setka has been kicked out of the Labor Party, still a very powerful, influential, and intimidating figure. I sort of wonder if Dan did announce restrictions on construction during stage 4, whether John Setka would come to the daily press conference and berate him in front of the cameras.
Of course not, because the people who'd be out of work as a consequence of construction being stopped would be receiving JobKeeper or JobSeeker or whatever. No, we're never going to go to town on him. But you know what the left is like. It doesn't matter what you do in the left. It doesn't matter how you've breached whatever principle that they've got. They go quiet on it. You'd say, Dan Andrews tomorrow could go and beat up a black guy on Spring Street and spit on him, and no one would say a word about it from the left and the left media. They wouldn't. They would just go, "Oh, he had a bad day. It's not him. He's made a terrible mistake, but he was under stress at the time." They come up with every excuse for behaviour by their own people. But hey, try and do it the other side, the other way around. They're ruthless.
Well, it's like the Black Lives Matter protesters here in Victoria in June. They were saying defund the police. Then 3 months later, they're cheering on Victoria Police arresting pregnant mothers and grannies and excusing all Victoria Police overreach and overzealousness because all the lockdown measures are the right thing to do.
Well, the left love the police when the police are doing what they want done. They absolutely love the police. That's what scares me. I mean, I'm not anti-police, but police is just another arm of government. It's there to do what the government wants done, and the government is not our friend.
Focusing still on Victoria, we're sort of going all over the place because it's basically because when we get on to something, you've got a lot to say on it, which is good. But I still want to get your opinion on the board of inquiry into the hotel quarantine program, because I'm sure you've been seeing that it's been Peter Credlin, Sky News host, Tony Abbott's former chief of staff, who's actually made greater progress on. We're getting closer to who made the decision to hire unified security to do the hotel quarantine, thanks to her, rather than the actual inquiry. And it seems that with the extraordinary hearing, they're basically, all the people involved are trying to sort of save their sort of legal reputation after Credlin basically put them to shame, and she's also put the Melbourne Press Pack to shame as well, with just one appearance.
Tim, let me pose some points to you. This is a decision, assuming that's correct, that it was the hotel security guards or the lack of their ability to do their job that caused how many thousands of people to die? I don't know what the figure's up to at the moment.
798 in the second wave who've died.
798 people have been killed, and if you believe all the things that the lockdown lovers will tell you, it's not just about the people who die. Apparently, everyone else gets left with permanent lung damage and heart damage. Yeah.
Internal organs get crippled, apparently.
Apparently. So if that's the case, we have thousands of people who have been affected by this decision. Now, imagine that you were driving a bus in Victoria, and 1,000 people died because you drove that bus into a building. Do you think that Dan Andrews would call a royal commission, or would he have a simple basic commission of inquiry? Now, the reason
bus driver would probably be prosecuted.
No, but the concept of thousands of people dying, he would call a royal commission into why it happened. Yeah. Well, bridge collapse. Let's say the Westgate Bridge collapsed again. Maybe that's a better example. Would he call a royal commission, or would he have a commission of inquiry?
Oh, yeah, he'd have a royal commission.
We have a royal commission. Now, why has he not called a royal commission? Because a royal commission has unfettered powers to do what it needs to do. He deliberately called a commission of inquiry because he could limit its ability to do its job. And that's always been what the intention of it was. Credlin embarrassed them into having to do their jobs. You think they seriously couldn't have thought to do that at any time earlier? These commissions of inquiry are full of highly experienced QCs and barristers and lawyers. They know how to get evidence if they need to get it. It was never part of their job to actually get to the bottom of what was going on. It was always going to be a whitewash, and I bet you it still ends up a whitewash.
Well, I know that Credlin is there 6 p.m. every night vowing, I'm not going to go away. You're not going to silence me. I will get to the truth. I'm just warming up, and, so-and-so, you're next on my list. And, fast go back 5 years. I mean, she was Tony Abbott's chief of staff. She had a reputation of being very intimidatory in his office, so she's not going to be scared about any pushback from Dan at his daily press briefings, or what social media says about her, whether she's a real journalist or not. She's tough as nails.
Funnily enough, actually, I worked with her briefly when I actually did work for Helen Coonan. She was Helen Coonan's chief of staff for a while as well. Look, I don't know what went on in Abbott's office in the time she was there. All I know is that Abbott's office was an absolute cluster. And whether that's because of her, whether it's because of Tony, whether it's both of them, I don't know. I wasn't privy to all that sort of stuff. But, look, she has clearly done a good job as in a journalist role of trying to get to the bottom of what took place here. But, Andrew threw Mickey Koss under the bus. Do you think he's not going to throw Sutton under the bus? Do you think he's not going to throw everyone else under the bus? He's never going to take responsibility for what happened. Never. That guy will go to his grave not accepting responsibility for anything. That's the type of guy that he is.
Well, we saw the last 24 hours, the Cox Plate backflip. Owners will not be allowed at the Cox Plate on Saturday, given, well, grand final barbecues, gatherings are banned. Although Martin Bakula, who he is the Minister for Jobs Industry, he's one of the ones in the gun during the in this Board of Inquiry. It was amazing today, his mea culpa with 3AW Neil Mitchell saying, yeah, I stuffed this up, and that is, it felt like a subtle dig at Dan, like, oh, see, I've accepted responsibility, I've apologized.
Are they factually in the same alignment, or are they factual enemies?
I have no idea. They're all political animals in the Andrews cabinet, as you'd expect.
Oh, well, anyone in Australian politics at state or federal level is a political animal. You can't avoid that. You don't get into those positions in modern Australian politics by accident. You're there because you've cut your teeth for some time, putting knives into people's backs politically. That's not certainly a bad thing, by the way, but they know what they're doing. But I just don't know how that works. Like, if that's a way of Pakula trying to already.
I'm speculating.
Yeah,
I just thought it was interesting that he did such a mea culpa, or sort of apologizing, I got it wrong, because that is not the Andrews style of leadership at all. No,
but obviously maybe it's a case of him saying, you know what, Andrew's time might be coming. Maybe I need to put myself forward as a different type of person. I don't know. I've got no idea. I don't personally know Andrew Pakula either. I just remember when he was at the what was a warehouse workers union, or whatever it used to be called. It's having him as a minister for jobs is like putting Dracula in charge of a blood bank. You don't expect many jobs will get made other than government jobs. I'm sure they're pretty good at making government jobs, but outside of that, you got to wonder.
Well, let's go finish off by going to the US, where that's the big election that everyone's got their eyes on. I know that you're not the biggest fan of Trump's presidential style or his policies, and obviously he's had a bit of a rough week with the leaks of those tapes where he says Fauci and these idiots. And then I noticed that you on your Facebook mocked Trump for sharing a Babylon Bee shared a Babylon Bee satire article on Twitter. Yeah, I'll just bring it up for the audience now. That was, and of course, when Trump does something like that, there's always what do you think of this 40 chess proposition that everything he does is strategic genius?
Tim, I don't know if he's going to lose in, how long away is it now? I think it's only 3 weeks away, isn't it?
November 3rd. We find out the result November 4th.
Right, so it is. It's 2 weeks away now. I don't know what the result's going to be, but as I understand it, Trump has pretty much trailed in every single poll. So you would think if an election was held today, he probably wouldn't win it. Who knows what's going to change in the next 2 weeks? But if he does lose, I'd love to see how this will be explained by way of 4D chess. I don't think
if he loses, he loses, and we know he doesn't like to lose.
Yeah, but I don't for 1 minute think that Donald Trump's going to run some sort of coup or protest.
No.
He'll complain. He'll bitch about, it was all set up against him and the media was against him and coronavirus didn't help. And I understand that and maybe have some points in that respect. But I don't think he's going to run some coup. The point is, you had a guy who could have spent 4 years in office doing something. He had the Senate and the House for the first 2 of those 4 years. What did he do? Now, don't get me wrong. The Gorsuch appointment was mostly good. Gorsuch has proven to be a communist in one particular way, but leave that aside. Kavanaugh is not as good, but he's not a total lefty. Barrett so far looks okay. I'm glad there's been some Supreme Court appointments. But other than Supreme Court appointments and tax cuts, what did the guy do?
Well, yes, the wall hasn't been built, and you're absolutely right that House and Senate majority from 2017 to 2019 was wasted. But then again, he's not the first Republican president, and that's not the first Republican Congress to waste that. George W. Bush had the House and the Senate for most of his presidency, and look what a mess they made.
Well, I agree with that, except that I've never heard anyone go on about, George Bush is playing 4D chess. I've never heard anyone talk about, that he was the greatest genius that ever existed, and that, right? And he also had a different style about him. I think there's a very strong possibility that that the Republican Party will pay a very long generational price for having hitched their wagon to Donald Trump. Almost
if he loses,
almost in an FDR. Post Herbert Hoover type, they were out of office for 20 years after Hoover, and Hoover was no conservative either, by the way.
No,
and, I think they will rue the day that they hitched themselves to the Trump wagon, because he hasn't delivered really. He's talked a lot. There's a lot of rhetoric, and that's why a lot of people love him. I understand that, but he hasn't delivered. I would say this though, in his favour. I expected that when he was elected in 2016, I expected him to become a Liberal the next day. And by Liberal, I mean American-style Liberal. I thought it was just a ruse to get himself elected. In fairness, he has been the person that he promised to be on the campaign trail. So I'll grant him that. I'll tick that box. As I said, he's done some good things, but it's been, I think, a hugely wasted 4 years, and it burned a lot of bridges that they didn't need to burn, because the guy can't help himself. He just can't. He can't sit there. He can't help but tweet about people he doesn't like all day instead of governing. What is that? How can you not just sit down and go for 1 second and go, you know what? I'm the president. I don't need to worry about these peons at CNN. What was so hard about that? Because the guy is so self-proud that he's got to preen like a peacock all day. And, maybe Americans put up with that for some time longer than Australians do. Australians would never put up with that. We'd never elected a guy like that in the first place, and he certainly wouldn't get re-elected. But I think they've just had enough of it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm no fan of Biden. I'm not looking forward to a Biden presidency, and he'll probably die.
A Harris presidency, perhaps.
Oh, that's what I was about to say. He'll probably die after a couple of years, and then you end up with Kamala Harris, and that's even worse still. So I'm not looking forward to it, but. Sometimes you just got to let the blood out. You got to get the poison out of the bloodstream, and Trump losing may well be that opportunity to open the veins and get the poison out.
I found that Babylon Bee article that he shared. He said, "Wow, this has never been done in history. This includes his really bad interview last night. Why is Twitter doing this, bringing more attention to Sleepy Joe and Big T?" And this. A Babylon Bee article, Twitter shuts down an entire network to slow spread of negative Biden news, which I'm sure you've seen many Babylon Bee articles. The thing about satire these days is it's hard to distinguish what is. And I know that Babylon Bee has a spin-off website, not the Bee, and Trump's a boomer. Every boomer's at least fallen for one Babylon Bee article as truth.
Oh, mate, Babylon Bee is brilliantly clever, and the amount of times they have, I think there's some articles in the past where things that they've satirized actually have happened in the future. They're just so close to the mark that, yeah, I agree. But how does Trump not know that the Babylon Bee is satire after all these years, all the tweets? All the social media. How does Trump not know that? And how does his staff not know that?
It's him tweeting. It's not like in Australia where a staffer might suggest tweets and that sort of thing. That's pure him.
But what? Someone hasn't picked up the phone to him straight away and gone, "Boss, you just tweeted a satire site." How does that stuff happen? He'd have people in his office all day. It would be an endless stream of people coming in and out. You don't think this guy has quiet time other than when he goes to sleep at night, do you? Yeah. But he doesn't listen to it.
He would listen to some advice, but definitely not a lot of you would say the fretters in there, because he's made them fret countless times over the years, going off script in press conferences. That he wouldn't take something like that down is no surprise.
The sad thing about him is that when he talks on script, he's actually pretty good.
He is. Like, say, announcing the death of that Iranian general Soleimani, he obviously is reading from a teleprompter, but it comes across as firm, authoritative. It's not robotic. It comes across as strong, and it's extremely, I would say, appropriate, and especially in a sensitive moment like that. But then he goes on Twitter and say he died like a dog.
Yeah. But why was that necessary? All you're doing is throwing red meat to your own supporters who are going to vote for you anyway. It's like he was permanently campaigning for the Republican nomination, and he still is permanently campaigning for the Republican nomination.
Well, that's why he has done those rallies for the past 4 years. And, well, now that he's this is another tweet that he got into trouble to, because he said that because he's recovered from the virus, he can't get it immune. But do we have that, potential reinfection in Victoria at the moment, with somebody who got it in June, who's tested positive again, and Dan's public health team are trying to sort out whether it is a reinfection.
Let's not revert to this topic, but let me just put this to you for a minute. If you can get reinfected, then why are we bothering with anything to do with this virus? Why? Because it means you'll never forget being trying to eliminate it. You can't, unless you keep the border permanently closed. I know I keep coming back to this. But what's the point? Why are we doing anything about this?
Well, that seems to be the approach of Scott Morrison. He said the international borders won't open until at least mid-2021. Frydenberger said the same. You can't leave Australia unless the government grants you an exemption.
But they do. But they do have an exemption.
Yes, they do.
Easy to get, but they are allowing people to leave. They are allowing people to come here. Shane Warne was allowed to go to London to commentate on cricket. Shane Warne is allowed to return to Australia. I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because I don't believe there should be any restrictions. But what if Shane Warne became a super spreader? Why are there any rules here? What do we hope to achieve by it?
Well, we saw a Danny Minogue. She was granted a hotel quarantine exemption in Queensland. She was allowed to quarantine at a home. Too bad if you had cancer. She went to Melbourne to work on that reality TV show, The Masked Singer. I'm not saying that she spread coronavirus, but there was an outbreak at the Masked Singer. At that production that was filmed during stage 4, and of course the joke is obviously masks don't work because people caught the virus on the Masked Singer. But obviously, despite Danny Minogue doing all that quarantine and that, she was still in an environment where she was susceptible to the virus.
None of it. There's no logic to any of it, Tim. There really isn't. We're going over old ground. But the vast majority of the public still thinks this is the right thing to do. That's what I just can't wrap my head around that.
Well, we might as well finish where we started, and we see the Northern Hemisphere, if they're going into winter, and so, obviously flu-like viruses spread, and the UK's got that lockdown tier system now, which will end in tears, if I may use that pun. And Wales has got that 2-week circuit breaker lockdown. And as a Victorian, when we were promised a 6-week stage 3 lockdown, I've heard it all before. It's not going to be 2 weeks.
Of course. We're now, we're 8 months on now since it started, aren't we? And we're no closer to an end.
7 months.
7 months. And we're
I'm counting because I'm a Victorian.
Well, so 210 days plus, and we're still no closer to an end. In fact, we're probably further away than we were 7 months ago.
Do you hold out any hope for these vaccines, or I'm not sure what your even view is on the vaccines?
Well, okay, let's just talk on that very, very quickly. The flu vaccine for the everyday common flu, okay, doesn't only have like a 60% effectiveness rate.
Yeah, you can still get the flu even with the vaccination. In fact, you can get the flu from the flu vaccine.
Right. So if it works on a similar basis, the vaccine doesn't solve your problem. In fact, you're probably infecting more people by giving them the vaccine than you are allowing the lockdowns to continue. But I think what you've just pointed out, though, is right, Tim. They will use the vaccine, assuming one is created, as the circuit breaker. They will say, there you go, you've got your vaccine now. Now we can exit all the restrictions. It allows the politicians to wash their hands of the problem. Because right now, the politicians to say, you know what, we're going to abandon all the restrictions means that you have to admit that you shouldn't have had them in the first place. And you're right, other than Ron DeSantis, no one's prepared to put their neck out like that.
And we've heard that, Victoria is planning to roll out its hotel quarantine program. And Dan Andrews in his, it's called Waffle Sessions. He says a lot and contradicts himself quite a bit. But a lot of people have grabbed on what he said about tracking devices on hotel quarantine return travellers.
Going forward, as we look to the entirety of 2021, for instance, not knowing when a vaccine turns up. That would then mean that you've got options, and one of those options might be to say to people, and other countries in the world are doing this, here is an electronic device that means we can be certain about where you are, but there is some technology that can actually monitor your vital signs as well, so it becomes something that's not just to ensure you stay where you're supposed to stay, it's also a way in which we can monitor whether you're healthy or otherwise. That's a piece of work that's being done.
Do you know what sort of device he's talking about? Because obviously an ankle bracelet or something, like it tracks your movements, but what that can track your vital signs as well?
So it's not my area of expertise, but I think
I'm asking for your speculation.
Well, I think there are monitoring devices, aren't there, that tell someone, how your temperature's going and all that sort of. Don't people put those on the infirm who are still under home care, and so that if it drops by a certain level, the nurse can come and attend. I mean, I don't know. It's not something I deal with very much, but I think things like this do exist. I'm not shocked that he'd be talking about fitting people with devices. I mean, it's all part of the being seen to be doing something, Tim. That's what they're doing here. They want to be seen to be doing something. Everyone seems to think that politicians exist to solve all our problems. And that's what they're responding to. They really are. Dan Andrews is doing what Dan Andrews instinctively does. He understands politics to be the exertion of power, to be seen to be doing something that people at the end of the day vote for me because I was seen to protect their interests, rather than getting out of the way. It's a completely different way of looking at politics as maybe you and I do, Tim, which is that we're there to get out of people's way and provide them with security and protection. And otherwise, just let people do their own thing. They start from the position of, we're going to tell you what to do unless you can prove to us otherwise.
Yeah, that's basically been that's why he's called Dictator Dan, is that these are the rules that I'm setting, obey them, and we know a lot of them are not based on health advice, as we've found out. That's why the curfew has been challenged. There's also a High Court challenge to the restrictions on freedom of movement. I'm not sure if you have a legal opinion on such challenges, because they're starting to pile up now.
That's a good question you asked, because funnily enough, even when we had the Spanish flu over 100 years ago now, we never went through, and our governments never imposed on us this kind of restrictions. And keep in mind, the Spanish flu killed 20% of people who were infected. And actually, funnily enough, I don't mean that in a hilarious way, as in an ironic way. The Spanish flu was actually very effective at killing people in their 20s and 30s, not people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. So the Spanish flu was an infinitely worse proposition when it first hit the world 100 years ago, and the Australian government still didn't use its quarantine powers to impose lockdowns on people. Now, do I think that the High Court is going to form a view that the initial restrictions imposed were unconstitutional? No, I don't think it will. I think they'll say for the information that we had at hand, the government reacted in a proportional and responsible way, even if it turns out in hindsight they were wrong. Can we now, however, justify restrictions on people going to church 8 months later, 7 months later, when we know that this thing is virtually no worse than a cold? No. Do I think the High Court, though, will form that same view? No. Because they're apparatchiks, just like the people who put them there.
Well, we have also Clive Palmer's challenge to the WA hard border. That's being heard in November. So is the constitutional challenge to the Victorian restriction on freedom of movement. But, well, as we've seen, sort of predicting what the High Court is going to rule, it's a bit of a mug's game.
Oh, absolutely. And look, and by the way, it's worth repeating, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Love decision that they came out with nearly a year ago now. Are you aware of that decision, Love? Where go on. Sorry, you want to say?
I think I know the one that you're talking about, but please inform the audience.
So what happened was there was a man who was a New Zealand citizen, had never lived in Australia, and he came to Australia on as New Zealanders do, because there's the mutual exchange. You don't need a visa. You just need to turn up with your New Zealand passport, and you can live and work in Australia as much as you want. I think I could be wrong, but I think you're even entitled to welfare. I could be wrong about that. Anyway, he commits a very serious offence. I think, and I could be wrong, but I believe he sexually assaulted a woman. He got convicted. He did his time in jail, and they put him on a plane and they deported him, or were about to deport him, to New Zealand. And he challenged that on the grounds that he claimed Aboriginal heritage. And the High Court, I believe unanimously, held, I could be wrong, I think it was maybe one vote against, but it was an overwhelming decision, held that because he had Aboriginality, or claimed Aboriginality, however you establish that, by the way, was another question altogether, that he therefore had the right to stay permanently in Australia, despite the fact he was never an Australian citizen, and despite the fact that he committed a serious assault on someone. That is an outrageous decision. It's absolutely terrible. And consider that nearly every member of the High Court who's there right now was appointed by the current Liberal government. These guys, you know, we need something in Australia like a federalist society that is going to be able to say to coalition governments, these are the people who we say are good jurists, not your mates who you keep appointing. So I don't know if you know, for example, Christian Porter appointed James Edelman because it was his mate at uni, or something along those lines. Right, and he was one of the people who was very responsible for that terrible Love decision. If that's the way you're thinking as a jurist, how the hell are you going to get anything else right? In all seriousness, it's just like Nixon. Nixon appointed most of the court that ended up voting in favour of Roe versus Wade. Ended up being rotten all throughout the 70s, 80s, and early 90s until Reagan really started to shake it up. If you're not paying attention to all these elements, and of course Brandis was a communist, so Brandis was always going to appoint lefties to the court as well, and that's what we've ended up with.
Well, it's not just the High Court; they appoint lefties too. What is it? Ida Buttrose was supposedly their compromise candidate to be ABC chairwoman. Brandis, he complained about Gillian Triggs heaps, but who he appointed as a replacement, Rosalind Croucher, and all the other commissioners. The only decent appointment that was ever made was Tim Wilson.
In fairness, what did he do when he was there?
Oh, basically, I think he just triggered the left that how dare you appoint somebody who's not left to our Human Rights Commission.
It was one commissioner out of 7. Mate, this stuff it's just pointless. I don't know if you remember the 90s when well, Howard didn't really want to do anything about the ABC, but Richard Alston, as a communications minister, decided, you know what, let's just appoint our own people. They made Jonathan Shire the CEO. Jonathan Shire was an undisputed member of the Liberal Party. And basically, the blob in the ABC just said, well, we're not going to do what you want. Make us. And you know what? If we want to really have a fight with you, you know what we can do? We can just refuse to put Peppa Pig on air. And what happens when you don't have airtime? You're going to look like the idiots, not us. They always hold them to ransom. You need to have someone who's got nuts. Again, you need someone who's got nuts who just says, I don't care if the ABC goes off air for a month, a week, a day, 2 hours. Who cares? If you want to go off air, that's fine. You won't get paid to go off air. But let's face it.
We both love it.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's face it. Why does the ABC exist? Why does it anymore? It is competing on every single turf with a private organisation. There is no need for its existence. Privatise it. It doesn't matter if you sell it for $1 and it closes the very next day, or someone turns it into the most communist station on Australian television. It doesn't matter as long as the taxpayer is not paying for it. Because what is it? $4 billion a year goes out in the ABC's budget. It's an extraordinary amount of money for what? Where it's not. I don't care about its political bias. I wouldn't want to own the ABC if it was the most conservative television station in the world. The taxpayer has no business running a media organisation. None. It needs to be immediately sold or closed. And why has it never been done? Why have coalition governments repeatedly done nothing about the ABC? They've never tried to corporatise it. They've never tried to cut its budget. They've never tried to reform it. They've never done anything about it. And then you cop all the abuse from them. If you're a coalition government, you're going to take the abuse from them. So the idea of, oh, you know what, we don't want to go too hard on the ABC because they'll just go anti us. They're going to go anti you anyway. Just go nuclear on them. There's no reason not to.
Yeah, I completely agree. But to summarise in one word, it's cowardice.
It is cowardice. It's totally cowardice. It's why when they get into government, as we discussed earlier, they don't do anything when they're in government, not just on the ABC, on any topic, because they want to stay in office.
Yes, that's sadly the modern political mindset, though we'll leave it at that now. I and the audience have thoroughly enjoyed your, it's a passionate but expert views on all the matters that we've discussed.
Well, thank you, Tim. It's always a pleasure coming on your program. I'm an avid watcher of your program, so keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. And of course, I'll be back tomorrow night with the Uncackables, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the show YouTube and D Live. Then another episode of Wilms Front Friday 7 p.m. on this channel that I'm on YouTube and D Live, and also Facebook. I've got as my guest Sasha Stone of the New Earth Project, who, he's a hippie for freedom. This is 2020. I don't care if somebody's a hippie. If they're for freedom, getting us out of these lockdowns, I'm prepared to talk to them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Wilmsfront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.